Hello, it's Amy, and I'm here with the first video in what I'm planning to be a series. And so I picked up the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova. I've got it in this great two-volume set from 1923. And this particular set has illustrations by Antoine Gaimard. But the plan is to slowly work my way through the books. It's just two volumes, and to make videos as I go with my thoughts and observations in a similar manner to what I did with Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time about 2 years ago now. It's hard to believe it's been just over 2 years now since I finished reading Time Regained, which is the final volume of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. But I really enjoyed that experience. And I think a lot of people here on YouTube, on BookTube, did as well. And so I thought, why not do it with the Memoirs of Casanova? I'm sure there are many people out there who have already read this work, and perhaps many people as well who haven't read it, but would be interested in either following along or rather just listening to me talk about the work and deciding for themselves whether they would like to read it as well. But of course, the name Casanova is kind of synonymous with this idea of seduction and the ladies' man and perhaps deception. In other circles, it's kind of synonymous with this idea of, dramatic, over-exaggerated romance that is going to come in hot and quickly burn out before you're on to the next thing. And I think this idea of this book full of the exploits of this ladies' man, this idea is what has often kept me away from the book in the past. And I think this idea has often been a turn off for others as well. But I read a lot of older essays and a lot of the 19th century and early 20th century writers had a lot of good things to say about these memoirs, and it's kind of upheld as an earlier example of the genre of memoir. It is a 17th century, sorry, not 17th, it is an 18th century memoir. He began writing it in 1791. It wasn't published until after his death in 1822. That was its first publication. But it is a memoir of the 18th century, and he was a very interesting person. Certainly from the writing in the preface, I can tell that he was a very witty writer. And I think he probably has a lot to say about 18th century European society and kind of a lot of commentary on what life was like then. And I think from what I've heard, he may even have commentary on other notable figures of the time. Probably not much, because his chief topic was himself and the women that he met, rather than the men he encountered. But I think, in many regards, it's going to be a very interesting work, just, beyond the probably sensationalized accounts of his exploits with women. But yes, for many reasons, I think it's going to be an interesting work. And I'm not far in yet. I've just read the introduction and the preface. The preface is by the author himself, and I quite like the way he opens things up. In the introduction, the author of the introduction had mentioned that Casanova, in some ways, kind of fancied himself a philosopher, indicated that he was interested in metaphysics. And so I think it's very fitting that the preface begins with him addressing one of the big issues in theology and philosophy around the time he was writing. And that is this, this idea of God, the sort of dichotomy that many people saw between God and between philosophy, these two opposing worldviews, and this idea of free will or sort of this divine plan. And he starts by saying that he considers himself a Christian, but, and I want to remember the exact phrasing here, he is a Christian, but his Christianity is sort of predicated, looking in my notes here, his Christianity is fortified, that's the word he used. His Christianity is fortified by philosophy. So he considers himself a Christian, but he believes in a spiritual God. He doesn't believe that there is, fate out there leading to each of his actions. Rather, he believes that he has free will, which I think is going to be very important for this work, because he ends the preface by essentially telling us that, everything he's done has been, on account of his own actions. And the quote here I have is, "I prefer to consider myself the principal course of all, good or evil, which has befallen me." So everything good or bad that he's going to tell us about in this memoir is the result of his own actions. There is no fate out there that led all these things to happen to him. Rather, it is his own free will that led him down this path. And he would like us to understand that. In addition, he makes it clear that this is not going to be a moral work. He is not giving us life lessons. He kind of hints that, you could take some of his missteps and follies as, lessons, things to be avoided. But for the most part, he would much rather that we as the reader laugh along with him at his misadventures. And I like this other quote here that I've written here, where he says that at an early age, I learned that what is most harmful is excess, either in food or fasting. And, at first glance, you think it's going to be sort of this common, perhaps stoic, Puritan notion that excess is to be avoided, virtue is found in, self-restraint and avoiding excess, and that's how you're going to find health and happiness. But no, he is telling us the opposite. He says that he thinks it's far more dangerous to have excess of starvation or excess of fasting, excess of too little, rather than excess of too much. And so this is going to be a memoir of much. This is going to be a memoir of excess. And furthermore, he tells us that one thing he can't stand is a fool. And in fact, he enjoys hating fools. He clarifies for us that a fool is not someone who's uneducated. Rather, he dislikes people who are empty-headed. He dislikes people who are insolent and presumptuous. And he dislikes people who are defiant, or who show defiance towards wisdom. And so that is his definition of a fool. And I'm sure this is going to play into his memoir in some way. He's probably going to show us a few fools here and there. And to compound onto this, he tells us that he has never forgiven someone and he will not forgive someone. He has occasionally forgotten, the faults or the slights of someone, but he has not forgiven someone their slights or faults. And he almost takes this as a point of pride, a point of virtue for him. And so we have this, very contrarian character, someone who is, wittily rebutting all these things that would normally be considered, characteristics of a virtuous person. He's telling us that he's not all that concerned with giving us a moral lesson. He's not all that concerned with being the kind of person to forgive. He's not all that concerned with, being someone who shows restraint and avoids excess. Rather, he's telling us that he's someone who enjoys the pleasures and the sensual pleasures of life, and that is the kind of story that we are going to get from him. And I think it's going to be a good one. And so that, I think that's all for now. I've just read, as I mentioned, the preface, and chapter 1 is called His Early Life. But judging just by glancing at the first page here, I think we're going to get some sort of historical context, either of something that he finds relevant to his own life, or perhaps, something relevant to his early ancestors, because we begin here with the year 1428. But from what I've seen, it's evident that he wasn't born until 1725. And as I mentioned, he began to write his memoirs in 1791. He penned a preface somewhere around 1797. I'm not sure if that preface is the exact preface mentioned here. But then the manuscript kind of sat until after his death. And from what I understand, he's not sure whether he was going to ever publish it, or whether he might burn it in a moment of weakness. But at the same time, in the preface, he seems to be quite proud of it. But regardless, the manuscript sat, and in the 1820s it was officially published for the first time. Although from what I understand, it wasn't published in its entirety. It was censored, it was abridged, and I think it's only more recently that you would have that complete, unabridged, uncensored version of the Memoirs of Casanova. And to be honest, I'm not really sure what I'm working with here. From what I understand, that complete, unabridged, uncensored perhaps wasn't published until the 1960s. So this particular edition would not be that version, because this is an earlier edition. But we'll see. Regardless, I think it's going to be an interesting and fun reading experience. And it's one of those books that the idea has been in my head to read for the past year or so. But I really wanted to wait until I found the right edition to read, which probably sounds odd, but there's just certain older books where I just feel like I need to have the perfect older edition in order to enjoy it as it's meant to be enjoyed. I don't think this is something that I could enjoy quite as much as if I were reading it, in a modern Oxford Library or Penguin paperback or something, or if I were reading it on ebook. It really needed to be something beautifully printed and beautifully illustrated. And I think I found that here in this 2-volume edition. So I guess I will see you again in the near future with the second video on chapter 1. We'll see how it goes with the chapters. It could be a chapter per video. It could be multiple chapters per video. I'll feel it out as I go along, and I will see you again soon.